Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Mountain Gardens Podcast. This is July 20 or so, 2023. Thank you for coming. So, I really wanted to call this Walking to Paradise, but that somehow didn't work. So, we ended up with Mountain Gardens Podcast, rather prosaic. Anyway, so my whole idea was to just kind of recount my history with this piece of land in particular. So it's a little bit just sharing my philosophy and my experiences, because I have a certain number of followers, which I really appreciate. People who are interested in my project. So I just want to start at the beginning and go through what I've been doing for the last 50 years. And episode 1 was kind of thinking about what I'm going to do with my life and working out a basic philosophy of what I'm really trying to do during this lifetime on this planet. And we talked about that, and I kind of ended up with this concept of paradise gardening. And then episode 2 was, having this philosophy, what am I going to do with this piece of land? I had purchased 3 acres approximately of wooded mountainside. And so, all right, what am I going to do? So then I talked about, I was thinking about overall design concepts, what we might call style of gardening, and like what examples am I going to work from out of the whole history of human land use on this planet. What things do I find appealing and which things do I reject? And then so it was this overall philosophy of the primitive versus civilization in terms of the question of how we're going to live on Earth. It seems like we clearly have lost our way as a species on this planet. And so the idea is to send out scouts, right? Like when you find you've gotten off the path, then you start looking in every direction of where did we miss our way? How do we get back on the path, so to speak? And so this is just one more experiment. I feel like there should be thousands and millions of such experiments going on at this point in time. And so this is just exploring one particular direction, and the idea is that where we got off was with the beginnings of civilization. So I oppose civilization to the primitive, as in terms of how we live on Earth. So the primitive is like fitting ourselves in to how everything is. That's also Taoism. That'd be the Chinese approach. That our goal in life is to fit ourselves in a harmonious way into the way, or the Tao, the way things are, the way things are happening. So we want to understand the Earth in order to fit into it better in a way that works for us and for the planet. Civilization, on the other hand, is the attitude that we really should orient ourselves not towards the planet, but towards each other. So that the most important thing is to fit ourselves into society, or the way things are going in society. Civilization, you could also call it the economy, or the state, or the system. Those would be all different words. When the primitive is more like lines up with Taoist ideas. So that's where I think, and a number of other people think, we got off, in particular with the development of agriculture leading to urbanization and hierarchy, basically, which in primitive societies are non-hierarchical by and large, except in certain symbolic ways. Anyway, that was kind of the fundamental philosophy. So, and I might say right here, interject that I am really, really enjoying my friends David and Janet's current podcast called The Book on Fire, and they are working their way through a book called what's it called? Hang on a sec. Excuse me. This book is called The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity by David Graeber and David Wengrow. I'm a big fan of David Graeber, a sort of anarchist theoretician. So this book is looking at different philosophies and arguments about the distinction between hunter-gatherer societies, or we would call them foragers is the current word, and origins of agriculture. All these questions this book is bringing up again, and it's kind of like Old Home Week, because they're talking about all these things that I was reading when I first bought my land and was thinking about what I'm going to do with my life. And there was a lot of interest at that point in time in hunter-gatherer / forager culture. Books like Man the Hunter and The Original Affluent Society and Stone Age Economics, which was kind of a whole rethink going on at that point in time, that these forager type people were really not just undeveloped. It wasn't just a matter of that they hadn't figured it out yet. Actually, they had figured a great deal out. And they set up social structures specifically designed to prevent development of hierarchy, for example. So it's great reading about all this stuff and thinking back on all what I was thinking about back in the 60s at the time I bought my land. So I highly recommend that discussion. It's called The Book on Fire. Anyway, that's been fun. So to get back to what we're talking about, so then I did episode 2, which was, what did I just say that? Yeah, about a sort of style, what style of gardening I'm going to take, what are going to be my examples, and then what is the garden going to be composed of. So I talked about that as well, plant selection, the whole idea being to, as I said, to pack my land with more and more useful species, with the idea being to try and ultimately get back to this situation where I become a forager on my own land. Versus like what happened with civilization is we got into the idea that the land is just raw materials which we use to construct our lives, versus the land being alive and living force that we interact with and try to fit ourselves into. So I'm trying to get back to that forager. Really, what I want to get back to is the mental attitude, the way people felt about the earth and their life, and then their interaction with the earth. Because that's what's really wrong. Ultimately, it's our value system. We value the earth in a different way, as like a whole bunch of dollar signs out there. All of whatever we look at, can I turn it into money or not? So there are a few people left that still ascribe to the what I call proper values of living on Earth. Primitive people, they had to retreat forever because agriculture is by nature expansionist, since it ruins the environment, and then it has to go on and colonize a new environment. And these hunter-gatherer people, of course, were quite unable to compete against civilization, which had weapons and armies and all that stuff. So they just had to retreat into ultimately places that were unsuitable for agriculture, like the Kalahari Desert or the Australian outback or the depths of the rainforest. So that's where what few people are left who really ascribe to the values which I'm calling primitive remain. And then, of course, you retreat, and then they find oil or lithium or cobalt or something in your land, and that's it, game over. But anyway, so that's episode 2. So episode 3, logically in sequence, should be, all right, having made these decisions, having these values and so on, then what did I do? I have 3 acres of wooded mountainside. So how did I proceed? So I was going to talk about, making a clearing, cutting down some trees, building a log cabin out of them, and discovering that my land was 80% rocks, and just responding to, getting into a direct, hands-on relationship with this piece of land. So I wanted to talk about all that, and I will talk about that. But that is going to be postponed to episode 4, because I kind of want to interrupt this sequence and jump all the way to the end, which is going to be the future of mountain gardens. So that's what I want to talk about today, is what's going to happen here on this land next. Because I'm 80 years old and my health is not great. It's kind of declining for reasons that remain mysterious. I'm resorting to Western allopathic medicine, and I'm using Chinese medicine, and I'm taking some Ayurvedic herbs, etc. But nothing seems to be really helping with my problem, which is sort of what I call lightheadedness all the time. Other people are calling it brain fog. Anyway, so I'm having to think a lot about what's going to happen next to this piece of land that I love so dearly and have devoted my lifetime to caring for. So this has kind of largely been a one-man project, but I've had a ton of help. I've had wonderful apprentices here. There's almost always several people at least here, and for many years it was 6 to 8 people living here in little shelters around the property and cooking and eating meals together and having a sort of communal lifestyle. My goal really all along has been to set up some kind of community here. And for all sorts of various reasons having to do with my personal history and whatever, that's just never happened. And yeah, so it turned out that my partner just couldn't hack it. The idea of a communal, consensus-based community just didn't work for her. And eventually we split up, but rather than divide up the land, we mutually agreed that we would pass it on to my son. So I operated under that idea for many years, and I didn't really feel there had been so many wonderful apprentices who came through here who undoubtedly would have been happy to stick around indefinitely and be the nucleus for this community that I've always wanted to create. I mean, I've always lived in communal life situations. Way back when I was in Detroit, it was a group house, and then when I moved down to North Carolina with some neighbors who had a commune. Communes was big in those days. You don't really hardly hear that word commune much anymore. But that was a big deal back in the 60s. So I moved down here with this commune. Communes had a notoriously short lifespan. It lasted a couple of years, but by then I was already much in love with this area, and I ended up finding this few acres of land, which I bought, and my idea there, again, was this is going to be a commune. There's going to be 6 or 8 people all working together on this project. Well, that never really happened. Until finally, just in the last year or two, it's become clear that my son is not interested in this land. And so finally, I have a green light to develop his community. It's too bad that my personal situation is kind of deteriorating, that I don't really have massive amounts of energy to put into this right now. But I'm putting in whatever energy I got, that's for sure. So, yeah. So, where to go with that? So what I did is create this paradise garden, which was like another way of thinking about land use and how we're going to relate to the planet and so on, with this whole idea of paradise gardening. So that was good, and it's been very satisfactory, and I'm very happy with what happened. I can always think about how it could have been better, but I'm not complaining about what I did. So that's just part one, so to speak. That's just one half of the picture, and the other half of the picture is developing a community to do this work, because this is not one-person work. And amongst our fundamental human needs is to live in society. As a species, we're not meant to be hermits, you know. Hello?
Hey, Mr. Hollis.
Hang on, wait a sec. Hello again? Are we here? Yeah. Okay. Just got interrupted for a little minute. Where was I at? Oh, so this whole idea of community. Yeah, so this is the other part of the whole project, is setting it up in an ongoing way. So the idea of my garden, everything I've done is trying to be an example of it's going to be relevant to more people than just me. So what we really need to do is come up with another way of relating to the land, and we also need to figure out how to work together, which is something that we've largely forgotten, I think, is how to work together in small communities. Traditionally, of course, all these small communities were based on kinship. You know, tribal societies was all about kinship, and that was kind of the glue that held everything together. Well, we don't have that. So we've got to come up with another way to learn to live together, because it's, I would say, mandatory at this point in time that we start figuring that out as civilization gradually collapses, which to my mind is pretty much inevitable. We're going to be thrown back more upon ourselves. You know, our situation now is you just get a good job, you earn money, and then you're home free. You know, you got all this money, so you can fill all your needs and everything and whatever with his money. Well, that's obsolete. That's part of the problem, really. So I have a lot of ideas about how community might work. For one thing, there was a lot of interest in communal living back when I was just getting started. Part of this whole Back to the Land movement, you know, Whole Earth Catalog, Mother Earth News, all that stuff, was very interested in community. At that time, there were several books that came out about communal living, which concluded that the really successful community situations that we have are religion-based, like the Amish, Mennonites, those kind of groups seem to have pretty stable communities, which also, they didn't describe exactly to all my values, but They're kind of neo-primitivists in a way, like the Amish don't let electricity into their houses, I think. So these were some models. There weren't very many models out there that people were looking at, and I think that's a very useful observation, that it's like, since we don't have kinship, what we need to do is have a really strong shared value system. So in the case of the Amish, say, it's more religious based. And I think that's right. So what I'm proposing is a new religious base, and that it would be a religion based on Gaia. Because Gaia, after all, is God, or really the whole universe if you want, but just starting with our local God, that would be Gaia. You know, the earth is one. It's all one living creature. It all started from one. You can't look at any part of it without ultimately having to understand the whole thing. So that is suitable to take as our God, and so that would be the value system that we want to base our community on, is that we all share this concept of God, of Gaia, and compose our lives accordingly. And that would be like the primitive, so to speak. That's also how they thought about the world. So, this next phase of my life, which is, I don't know how long it's going to last, is going to be devoted to trying to actualize this vision of a small community of like-minded people. And one of the models that's out there currently is the idea of eco-villages. All right, that's okay. Or like consensus-based community and so on. So, and the other word I use is neo-primitive. So like trying to get back to many aspects of the primitive attitude towards life, towards a planet that we can use. So I just want to. So this whole podcast is basically for recruitment, because I really need to find these people while I'm still functioning, and work with them and show them what they need to know to operate this place, which is very complicated. I've set up a very complex garden situation, and the whole thing I've set up was for 6 to 8 people. Well, I haven't had 6 to 8 people in several years. Starting with COVID, we started having not enough help. The garden started being neglected, overgrown. And one of my goals was, or one of what I think are the goals of Gaia, is to increase the diversity and the fertility. Well, I've done a good job of that. And if this garden is neglected, it's very fertile. And it's very diverse, too, in terms of the seed bank that's in the soil and so on. Everything just goes crazy, which is great. I mean, that is my vision of the garden being a place where I can just become a forager, is ever closer to being actualized, but there's also lots of problems. I can see I've got a lot of plants out there that are getting overrun by other plants. You know, some of the plant collection is somewhat threatened if this kind of level of neglect goes on. Stuff that I have too much of already is going to crowd out stuff that I have too little of already. That kind of thing. So I'm feeling a lot of urgency to the situation. So my number one quest at this point in time is to find the people who are going to take over here. So that's what I want to talk about today. So I can start by just talking about what I have here. So there's a lot of people interested in getting together with some friends and buying a piece of little land and starting a little community. That's a big idea, at least around here in western North Carolina. There's a lot of that going on, and I just want to address the sort of people who are interested in doing that, because this is really almost an ideal situation to accomplish that kind of goal, because I've done a lot already. You can get together with your friends and buy a piece of land and start from scratch, which is what I did, which is great. But I've already got a great deal in place. You don't have to start from scratch. You can start from 2.0 instead. So over the course of 50 years, I have accumulated lots of resources or assets, so that you're not actually starting from scratch. So this is a terrific piece of land. It's 3 acres. It's at the foot of the highest mountains in eastern North America, and in fact what's billed as the steepest hiking trail in eastern North America starts from my property, which is at the end of the road up against the National Forest. It's called the Woody Ridge Trail, if anybody's interested. I think there's some videos about it, because they have an extreme foot race up there once a year called the Quest for the Crest. So, and as I learned early on in the game, my little 2.8, 3 acres of land, which I've now managed to increase to about 5 acres, has 4 different plant communities on it. That means different trees, different shrubs, different herbs. So a lot of diversity here, which is great. That's a terrific thing to have to work with, and to just study the ecology. So in terms of introducing new plants, I have a lot of different habitats to work with already. And much of my goal over the years is to increase the number of habitats, because I want to increase the diversity of species on my land. And the way to do that is, well, for starters, is to increase the diversity of habitats. So I do have these different plant communities: oak hickory up on the ridge, cove hardwoods down in the valley. But there's other ways I can increase diversity. For instance, there's no water on my land. There's water uphill from me in the National Forest, but before it gets to my land, it goes underground, basically because it's been buried by landslides and so on over the years. So actually, when I first finally came to start gardening, I found out that the area in the center, which I cleared, was about 80% rocks, for instance, just because of all these periodic landslides that have come down and buried my creek. It comes out on the other side of the road as my neighbor's spring. So I could, one way to increase habitat is to have more water on the land, using the runoff of my water system, which starts up in the National Forest above me, and building ponds and so on, creating wetlands. And another way I can increase my diversity is to add a lot of limestone to one particular part of the garden, because there is no lime in this soil. And there are lots of plants that require that. There are also lots of plants that don't want that at all. So I don't want to lime the whole place for sure, but I can take one section of it and add a bunch of lime, raise the pH, and that will be a new habitat where certain plants that wouldn't otherwise grow here will be able to grow. So, in other words, it's just a really interesting piece of land with a great deal of promise, just to summarize that up. And then on this land, I have built this botanical garden of useful plants, I call it, which is also nicely arranged. I say grown ecologically and arranged ornamentally. So I seem to have, or I claim to have, the greatest diversity of medicinal herbs, for instance, in, I don't know, eastern United States. I don't know how big, because we've got all the native medicinal herbs. Most of them were already growing here at the start, and the few that weren't, like golden seal and false unicorn root and so on, I've introduced and successfully naturalized here. And then I also got into Chinese herbs, which I think I talked a little bit about. I was largely drawn into that because of this whole category of tonic/adaptogenic, that is to say health-promoting herbs. And I gradually started to grow all the Chinese medicinal herbs, partly because they can grow here, similar bioclimate, etc., and also oriental edible things. It's one of my other big areas of plant collecting and introducing. Had to do with perennial vegetables, food plants. So we got a lot of that. So here's this very interesting piece of land, and on it is a very interesting collection of plants that I have assembled, which I really need to teach the next generation about while I'm still functioning and able to teach. There's all these plants out here that require attention in different sorts of ways. And for starters, people just need to know how to identify them and take care of them. So that's one of the assets that's on offer here. And then over the years, I've built up a considerable amount of infrastructure. I started off with a little yurt, wooden yurt, on the Bill Copperthwaite model. That was back in, I guess I bought the land in 1972, so the first thing I did was build this little wooden yurt. And I lived in that, and that's still there. It's kind of on its last legs. There's a certain amount of rot. We just covered the entire roof with a giant sheet of plastic to just try and get a couple more years out of it. It's possibly my favorite of all the buildings on the land, actually. I spent many, many happy times in that yurt. And then as I lived in the yurt while I worked on building a log cabin. It was the first thing serious thing I really ever built. I used the trees from off the land, and that went on for a couple of years, building this log cabin. So that's still there. Someone lives in that. It's a one-room cabin with a loft. And then when I got married, we built a big building called, which we called the Pavilion. It was about 16 by 32 feet, and it housed a giant library, my lifetime book collection, something of which I was very, very happy with. I mean, that was like almost a significant part of my life work went into accumulating all the resources which were in that building. My library, our seed bank, which included a lot of pretty rare stuff, herbal apothecary, a wall of Chinese herbs, a wall of tinctures that we'd made. That's getting into another whole aspect of my life, which is this whole medicinal thing, herbal thing, which we'll talk about some other time. But that was all in there, to say nothing of the tool room underneath the building and the photovoltaic system and the whole nursery area that was under the deck, the potting area and outdoor kitchen. All of it burned down March of 2022. That all went away all of a sudden, right there at the beginning of my big 50th anniversary year. So that's gone, but we're in the process of rebuilding. So there were a lot of big trees up there that had to come down, that we've milled into lumber, 2x6s and so on. with a portable sawmill, that we actually still have a small sawmill here to work with. And still a fair number of logs that haven't been sawed up yet. So we've started on the rebuild. We actually framed up the walls a couple of weeks ago. We hope to get a roof on it by this autumn. And started on the walls. My house is totally clogged up with donated books. So I'm eager to have someplace to put them, and we've got a little temporary herb shop, which is really a pretty inferior situation, but we are starting to make some tinctures again and assemble a collection of Chinese herbs and so on, because we were sort of the herb shop for the neighborhood here, where people could stop in pretty much any time. It was on our system. You could come anytime and get tinctures or herbs. So we did a lot of that, and so we would like to recreate that again. So that's another building. So cabin, and then we had the pavilion, and hopefully we'll have again. Although we'll never, I'm sure, assemble the kind of collection of resources that I had. This was really a magnificent library, and it had everything we're going to need to survive if and when the internet fails us. Nobody knows how to do anything anymore, starting with reading a map. It just, I don't know, everything about the Cherokee, and I don't know, it went on and on and on, how much was in that library. But anyway, moving right along, we also had, at one point, I had a chicken coop, and it gradually, over the years, evolved into a dwelling. So that's another like one-room house with a sleeping loft that apprentices stay in. It's pretty nice. That one has water. It has its own tiny little photovoltaic system. So there's a little kitchen set up in there. That and the cabin are the two nicest dwellings that we have probably. And then we have a new yurt, the most recent building on the land. That was this same man, Bill Copperthwaite, whose design I followed for my first yurt in 1973 or so. Came down here again and actually led a workshop to build a new yurt. I guess that was probably about 10 years ago now. That's a very nice structure, well insulated, nice wall of windows. There's definitely more that could be done with that yurt, but it can be lived in year-round, which is nice. And then we have other structures that are kind of in process. So we've got a couple areas under roof that I would like to see evolve into dwellings. A couple of sheds, basically. And then there's another whole bunch of stuff. So those are kind of the buildings. There's some tool sheds. There's this little shack that we made into the herb shop. So there's half a dozen or more little structures on the land. So it's not like totally starting from scratch. There was a great building here, which was a dome, a cob dome, that one of the apprentices built over the course of a year, just using the clay that was on the site and saplings. And he built a lovely little dome. It was like a kiva. He plastered the inside, had a skylight, had a living roof over it. And yeah, it was wonderful. It was really highlight of the tours I used to give. He built it at a cost of about $50, so it was a terrific model. But anyway, it got injured by a tree falling over it, and we didn't even quite realize that some water started getting in, and it gradually some rot got in, and it lasted, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, which is not bad for a homemade dwelling that cost $50. It was easy to heat in the winter. I'd love to see that duplicated again at some point. Anyway, that's not there anymore. There's just a big pile of cob now that we have to work with. And then there's another little tract of land out at the end of the road, so it adjoins my property, but it's separated by a little bit of woodland. It's just a 2 or 3 minute walk from the center of Mountain Gardens to this spot at the end of the road where I was planning to start a school. I think there's a video online about it, recruiting a director. So we got as far as pulling up an old Airstream trailer that I purchased from somebody in the neighborhood. And we made a clearing. We put in some photovoltaics, so there's some electricity out there. We got as far as roofing over 2 areas. One was meant to be the classroom/library, and the other was meant to be the outdoor kitchen, and then there was supposed to be a number of primitive shelters. I wanted to do like a whole sampler of primitive shelters, 9 months a year kind of thing. Not necessarily winterized, but yurts and teepees and lean-tos, Appalachian shelters, whatever. I just wanted to do a whole variety of stuff just using native materials for the people who are going to be attending this school. And that's still, part of the goal. But what's out there is the Airstream trailer and 2 roofed over areas that can be worked with and turned into something or other. So that's kind of a summary of the infrastructure that's here. And I might just say that school should be enough to provide income for many, if not all, of the people who are going to be living here. The idea of this community is that everybody would take one part of what's going on. The nursery business, raising food, making food, operating the kitchen, making medicinal teas and tinctures and so on, or operating the nursery, operating the seed business. Lots of little interesting economic opportunities for people to earn a small income. And the kind of people I'm looking for are not people who are dedicated to making a great deal of money, because the purpose of the whole community is to meet our needs as much as possible directly from the land. So you need relatively less amount of money. But probably the biggest way that people could make what money they need here would be by way of this school, where whoever's here could teach, whatever their specialty is, and have their own apprentices and so on. So those are some of the assets that are here on the land. We are off the grid, but we do have photovoltaics. We have actually 2 different systems to serve different parts of the property. And let's see, so we have running water that comes down out of the national forest, and we have some ponds that it's saved in, and then the overflow becomes wetland that we utilize. We have all these potential building materials here. So we've got clay that is suitable for doing cob. We've got any amount of rocks, and they're quite nice rocks, really. They're flat on 2 sides, most of them. It's not those rounded boulders you get out of a river. Nice building rock. So those are assets. And there's still a certain amount of timber on the land. I've cut down about as many trees as I want to. I want to keep a pretty significant amount of land in the original condition, having, as I said, these different plant communities. So I want to retain some of all of that. But there's still a fair amount of saplings that can be thinned out and so on. And at the moment, anyway, we have a ton of firewood. So the garden was surrounded by hemlocks, and they've all been killed by a little invasive insect. So for the time being, we've got lots and lots of hemlock for firewood and so on. Oh, let's see, what else can we talk about? So we are We do have an internet connection. It's not great. The whole issue with the phone is starting to be pretty problematic. I just have a landline, which it seems like is becoming increasingly obsolete. But we do have an internet connection that works most of the time. And we have a website, as you probably know. We got a bunch of YouTube. There's a ton of videos up there. There's all kinds of interviews. I've been video interviewed about 4 times in the past month. And I suppose these will all pop up somewhere online. Eventually, the YouTube videos are a good way to learn about what we're doing. A lot of them are individual plants, but there's also a lot of them that are kind of more overall, including one about this Paradise Garden concept. I think there's one about the end of the road. Hello again. Hang on. Let me put it on pause. Okay. Just to resume, I keep being interrupted. Let's see, I was running down the assets that are in place here in terms of thinking about building up of a community. So yeah, a lot of stuff on the YouTube, and we have a web presence. There's a lot more that could be done, but I share everything I do. I try to share by way of the internet, but I'm woefully unknowledgeable about social media and not very fond of it, in fact. So I don't do much with it, but somebody else could do a great deal with it in terms of outreach, which is what we're all about. And for that matter, in terms of marketing, to the extent that people need to earn some money. It's really very untapped. We could be selling a whole lot of stuff that we don't even try to sell. We have a lot of unique resources, the plant collection that's out there. I just had a email the other day about Fangji, Stephandra, how great it is for joint pain, and nobody's ever heard of it. I've been growing it for years. Nobody's ever asked for that plant. There's just all kinds of stuff going on that we're well positioned to take advantage of. This whole rediscovery of herbs and the whole concept of growing Chinese herbs in America, adaptogens, all that stuff. We are very much, we've intersected with the future, really, which was my goal at the beginning. It was Buckminster Fuller or somebody like you set your life course so that at some point in the future, you're going to intersect with where the future is going. Well, we're there. And it's a very beautiful garden. Lots of people come up and just look around, like the ones who interrupted me just now. They just want to stroll around. There's 15 or 20 things blooming at any given moment, or more than that probably, a lot of the time. Hundreds even. So people, and it was designed to be a kind of a strolling garden, a garden that you like to walk around and explore. And look at stuff. Some of it's shady and some of it's sunny, and there's just all these different environments that you pass through. So there's a whole little, there's something on my blog called Aesthetics at Mountain Gardens, which just has to do with garden design. So I give plant walks on weekends, something I'm still able to do and enjoy doing, and some of them are kind of themed, like Appalachian medicinal herbs or Chinese herbs or perennial vegetables, but a lot of them are just a plant walk where we just walk up and down and talk about all the plants, because there's hundreds and hundreds of plants here that I can talk for an hour about. The cultivation, the ecology, the identification, the uses of them, and so on. All very fascinating stuff. People enjoy that a lot, so that's another asset, if not the main asset, of what's available on the land. So that is just kind of a rundown of what is available in terms of developing a small community versus like just starting from scratch. So I've already done all the preliminaries, and now it remains is to figure out, it's probably the biggest challenge of all, as I said before, making a paradise garden out of a couple of acres of wasteland was easy compared to starting a community to carry on the work, because we are not very good at getting along with each other on a small scale, it seems. Different times I've had like 3 people here who I all thought were going to be the nucleus of my community. Well, 2 of them immediately got into a feud with the other one. And this kind of thing just happens over and over again. People just seem to have a lot of trouble getting along. So what we're looking for is people that put a very high priority on getting along with each other. That's like the highest priority of all, is good interpersonal relations in terms of starting a community. So I'm envisioning, a consensus-based community. That's what everybody's envisioning. Non-hierarchical, where decisions are made in common. And the idea would be that each member has a tract of land of their own. They get like a lease on a certain piece of land, and they can accumulate equity based on what they do on that land. And then if they ever at any point would need to leave, they could sell that tract of land, and whatever improvements they made on it, I envision each member having a little piece, I don't know, a quarter of an acre or something, to build a house on and landscape around. And so they would have equity in this piece of land. But of course, you could only sell it to another community member. The way I happen to live next door to, or almost next door, to what bills itself as the oldest intentional community in America, Silo community. It's about 1,600 acres and about 50 families, I think. It's a community landholding cooperative. They don't all work together on anything in particular. Each person has their own profession or occupation, as doctors or lawyers or builders or craftspeople and so on. They have lots of meetings. They work together in terms of looking after the land and so on. But the way Silo works is you get a lifetime lease, which you can then pass on to someone else who is also a community member. So if your kids want to become community members, they can inherit your land. Otherwise, you can sell it, but only to another community member. And if you cannot find a community, if that's not possible, if there isn't any way for you to sell it, then after a certain number of years of futile efforts, the community will buy it from you at some kind of a base rate. So that's kind of how I envision mountain gardens would work. That you could, if you made some improvements on your little tract of land, they call it a holding. If you made some improvements on your holding, you could sell them for whatever to somebody else. Or ultimately the community would undertake to buy it back from you. And how that would be valued, who knows? It would all be stuff remains to be worked out, all of those kind of details. Membership, so there would be a trial membership lasting about a year. It would be basically the same thing that I've always called an apprenticeship, where you would work here for a year and doing everything and getting familiar with the whole situation and what's going on, and try out all the different jobs, propagating and weeding and cultivating and harvesting and all those things. And, splitting wood for firewood, because we both heat and cook as much as possible with wood. So it's a neo-primitive community. I'm looking for people for whom that concept is appealing, trying as much as we can to get away from money. One of my goals in life, and I would hope would be a goal of this community, is to live on as little money as possible, whatever that means to you as far as what's possible. But the main idea is to try and derive most of our needs off the land, as much as possible to grow our own food. I didn't mention, in terms of assets, that we have ducks, and we built a little pond for them. That was a big job, digging out this pond by hand. That took a good part of the summer, one year. And we have chickens, so we produce, to some extent, meat, but mostly eggs. And there is a lot of, an interesting experiment would be just to see just how many people we could feed off of this little scrap of marginal land, much of which we have terraced now, so it's very much improved. We've got a whole hillside, the newest part of the garden, which we call the terraces, which was all woodland up until about 15 years ago, when we started clearing it because it has pretty good sun. It didn't have that good soil, but it had pretty good sun, so we've terraced up the walls and fertilized it, amongst other things, with human manure. Each one of these terraces started off with a trench down the center, which we used to fill the buckets from the outhouse. And it also forced us to double dig the land and so on. So there's a lot of potential space for growing food that we are really not taking advantage of because we just don't have enough people here. But there's all this idea that we can't possibly feed the human race without resorting to genetic engineering of crops and all this nonsense. So it would be a very interesting experiment to demonstrate just how much food can be grown off of what would be considered not even agriculture, not arable, not even agricultural, but really marginal land. That's always been meant to be part of the project here. So the idea is then that each member of this community would take over one or another of the areas that we're doing. We've got so many things going on with medicinal herbs and edible vegetables and perennials and all these craft plants and then making things, value-added products and so on. So each person would take over one of these areas, and presumably it would generate some income for them. The person who's in charge of food, who's running the kitchen, could experiment with and produce all kinds of value-added products, pickles and chutneys and relishes and who knows what all. And other examples, the person who's raising food could conceivably grow some surplus food to market, and then the seed business and the nursery business and the herb preparations. These all would obviously be capable of generating some income. And then as a group, we would work on maintaining the entire garden. So I would sort of envision half a day of everybody working together. This would be 5 days a week, and the other half a day they'd be working on their own particular projects. But of course there'd be a lot of sharing that went back and forth, and people would help each other on their specific projects whenever it was needed. Would be how it would work, and it would all be a lovely, harmonious community. There's quite a good book we're working out with called Creating a Life Together, which was written by a woman who lives at Earth Haven, which is an eco-village community kind of situation, not very far away from where I am in western North Carolina. It's very good. It's got a lot of examples of other efforts to create little eco-villages. And we're working with that in terms of thinking about our whole setup. So let's see. Let's take a little break here for a second. All right. So I got interrupted for a couple of days. Getting back to it now, and a little bit lost track of what all I covered. I think I said a lot of what I was planning to say. As far as this future community that I hope will evolve, in one sense it would be nice if I could tell you a little bit more about what the operating agreement / bylaws are going to be, but those remain to be determined by and large, and it's partly because, well, it's mostly because I really don't want to do that all by myself. I would like to have the people that are going to live here, or at least some of them, be involved in making up what the rules are going to be. So what are the rules for membership? Like, what are we going to do if somebody decides to just keep living there but not participate anymore? Just go out and get a job. You know, what, I don't know, there's just all kinds of potential issues to be considered. But I would rather not just like decide that for everybody that comes after me. So I'd like to have at least a few of the people that are going to be living here, and of course, whatever we do will be possible to revise by consensus. And then, and then in terms of the people I'm trying to recruit, really the biggest perhaps thing is to make a primary value is just all getting along together. At one point I had 2 or 3 people here who I thought were going to become the nucleus of my community, and then 2 of them got into a feud with the other one. So this is just like goes on over and over again. It's so tedious. We just have to make a number one value out of coming to resolution. You know, when there's conflict, then everybody just has to sit down together and resolve it. In particular, I had for many years, I lived next to this CELO community, which built itself as the oldest intentional community in America. There's about 50 families, and they determine everything by consensus. And for years and years and years, there was just one person who would consistently block consensus on issue after issue. Like they wanted to build a community center, and this one person just didn't want that to happen. So they were just kind of paralyzed. So we have to think in advance. Well, they have to recruit the kind of people who are, if they find themselves in the minority, consider themselves obliged to get themselves into the majority, either by convincing other people or by changing their own mind or by talking out some kind of compromise. But that has to be the highest value if anything is really going to happen here, and we're going to serve as a sort of model for what might happen in other places. So then, and one other thing, over this couple days, when I when I last recorded, I did a little research online, and I find out that this label I'm trying to use, neo-primitive, is not really good, because that actually refers to, if you search for neo-primitive, it's some kind of Russian art movement, avant-garde art movement in the last century. And really most of what I'm talking about falls under the term of green anarchy. So, I mean, I'm sort of okay with that. I've considered myself to be an anarchist over the years, ever since I got old enough to think about it. But I don't use that term a lot anymore. I feel like anarchy is a little obsolete, at least in terms of the way people think about it, is overthrowing the state, and then everything's going to go on as usual, except it'll all be worker-owned and collectivized and so on, which I really just kind of don't see happening. I think the whole structure of the state is erroneous. The term I identify more with now is autonomy. Like, we don't want to overthrow the state, we just want to move over and start our own thing and have as little involvement with the state as we can. And we're kind of lucky at this particular point in history, because we wouldn't have really been able to have the freedom to do that kind of thing for a lot of time in the past. So, yeah, autonomy. So what we're really trying to do here, both with the garden and with this small community we want to set up, is make an example. So the only way we're going to get rid of the state is if everybody deserts it, and it just starves to death, basically. That would be the goal of autonomy. And the only way that's going to happen is if there are more and more examples of the superiority of doing it differently. It's just like getting back to this primitive civilized thing. There are virtually no examples of primitive people voluntarily signing up for civilization. As Stanley Diamond says, civilization originates in conquest and continues in repression. On the other hand, there are many, many, many examples of civilized people coming in contact with the primitive and joining up. Whether it's Indian tribes, escaped soldiers or slaves, or kids that are kidnapped, and 10 years later the parents come to get them and they don't want to go home. Over and over again. People coming from civilized. The book Origin of Everything, he talks about the fact that there are kind of three main rules in primitive societies. One is the freedom to leave. You can just pack up if you don't like what's going on in the social structure of your place or something. You can just move somewhere else. Primitive people were, generally speaking, quite welcoming to other people joining them. And then the second principle is nobody gets to tell anybody else what to do. So one can easily understand the appeal of that to people coming from these civilized hierarchical societies. Anyway, that's what we're trying to set up, is something that works better than what's out there right now. And let's see, are we at the end of what I wanted to say today? Oh, so back to the green anarchy. So yeah, I consider myself an anarchist, as opposed to like not being part of the state, to the extent that anarchy equates to what I'm defining as the primitive. But really, unfortunately, the kind of people that I've met and rhetoric I've looked at in this area of green anarchy is kind of discouraging, really. I feel like that's where I should be recruiting people for my community, but the people that I see attached to that banner are, I don't know, are not exactly the people I'm trying to recruit. Like, in so many cases, they just don't seem to have any real life skills, and their whole idea of anarchy is breaking windows and shoplifting, and I don't know, I hate to generalize, and I hope I'm wrong about this. I can't say that I've met a huge amount of people who call themselves green anarchists. And just kind of an endless argument about rhetorical subtleties and principles. But anyway, that's the philosophy I'm ascribing is the philosophy that you'll find under green anarchy if you look it up on Wikipedia or somewhere. So just to clarify that. And so I think I'm just going to quit right now. This has been a little bit over an hour, partly because I forgot what else I might have meant to say that I didn't include in there. If something's missing, I'll tack it on next time. So Let's see. So just to reiterate, the whole idea is to find people who are interested in this philosophy and looking for a little piece of land to carry it on. And it could be individuals. It could be, small group of people that have gotten together and are shopping around for a piece of land. I'm looking for people that have a certain amount of life skills. If the water stops working, you should be able to figure out how to find the problem. You just start at one end or the other of the water system and work your way along and find the leak or the blockage or whatever, that kind of thing. And just, some simple carpentry skills. You know how to saw a board and pound a nail, and you've got at least a year of gardening experience, but hopefully more than that. Hopefully enough garden experience to know that that's what you want to do for the rest of your life. And ideally, some specific skill in one of the areas we've talked about, gardening or cooking or building or making medicinal herb preparation. It would be wonderful to have an actual herb practitioner here. They could set up a really nice situation for themselves with all these freshly harvested herbs right there in the garden. And it's meant to be kind of a healing garden. I think I talked about that idea of the Taoist garden as being a situation of perfect qi to promote perfect human health. So one thing mountain gardens could turn into is a whole healing center. There's just so many opportunities here that already are partly in place. So, yeah, I'm hoping I'll get some responses from this. And if you personally are not interested, just bear it in mind and pass my address, podcast, whatever, mountaingardensherbs.com, joehollisherbs@gmail.com. You can look at my website and find lots more information about what's going on here. And hopefully in a couple of weeks I'll do another one, which will be more getting back to the historical sequence and talking about how I first started working on the land and what things I learned and so on. And we'll just carry on like that. All right. Thank you for listening. All right. Well, I thought I was finished, but then I just thought of one more thing I wanted to add in terms of the possible future here, which is to say that for a long, long time, my goal was to make this Paradise Garden and then make a guidebook to the Paradise Garden. And there's a little third thing that goes in between, which is labeling everything, which has been which I've been trying to get done for about 20 years. But I have a new idea. I just at this point don't have the help. Anyway, a guidebook. So, well, this would be so great to do this now, because it could be, instead of being a book, it would be something you looked at on your phone as you walked around. And then you would go through each bed, and conceivably even you could point your, I don't know if that could be made to work or not, where you'd point your phone at a plant and it would tell you about it. But in any case, it could tell you about all the plants that are in that bed. And presumably there would be labels next to you and tell you the name, what it's good for, and even how you grow it. I mean, we could pack just more and more and more energy into that over the course of time. And all of a sudden, it would make the garden about 100 times more useful than it is right now. Right now, it's really cool to walk through, and lots of people do it, and they all love it. And but they don't really quite know what they're seeing. A lot of them. Some people do, to varying degrees. So that would just be a really fun project for somebody else or the group to take on, and it would undoubtedly there would be a way to earn some income from doing that. I mean, one issue that might come up is limiting the amount of attendance, actually. if it really got as popular as something like this should. Anyway, all right, now I'm signing off.